Hello, my friends. Welcome again to Indian Story Read Along. Today's story is from the Chandamama issue all the way back from June 1981. And I found that there were a lot of good stories in this issue. Chandamama was a children's magazine, a lot like Tinkle, but there were a lot of olden days stories in it. So this is one story. They used to have this section where they featured things from the Arabian Nights. It wasn't just from India, it was from all over South Asia and the Middle East as well, and also East Asia. So here is one story called Shipwrecked. Long, long ago, there lived a prosperous merchant in Israel. On his deathbed, he told his son, "Make it a point to pay back whatever I owe to others." That means he wants him to clear all of his debts. He was very honest. You could just die and be like, I don't owe you any money anymore. The son took a solemn oath to pay back all of his father's debts. It so happened that a wicked fellow overheard the conversation between the father and the son. Soon after the father had closed his eyes for good, the fellow told the son, "Your father owes me 10,000 rupees. The young merchant had no means of knowing whether the fellow spoke the truth or not. But to be truthful to his father, he paid the fellow the money he demanded. The father owed very little to very few, but inspired by the wicked man's example, people lined up to meet the young merchant to present their false claims. The young merchant understood that he was being exploited by dishonest people, but he went on meeting their demands without a murmur. Soon, he found himself left with nothing. He had to sell his house too. However, he still possessed his father's ship. "If I live here, people will never stop pestering me. Let us sail for some distant land. We can sell the ship. With the money we get, we can make a fresh living," he told his wife. You know what I was thinking here? I would think that, if someone told me, "Oh, your father owes me money," I'd be like, okay, there has to be some kind of agreement on paper. If you can show me the agreement on paper that my father signed, I'll pay you back. And he could have gotten rid of a lot of people this way, but he was not only honest, he was also very soft, so he just believed people's word. So this merchant had two little sons. The four set out for some distant port. In the high seas, the ship faced a terrible storm. Waves grew unruly. That means they were wild and they were too powerful for that ship. Wind tore the sails to shreds. Soon a wave as high as a hill lifted the ship to the height of a palm tree and then brought it crushing down. The ship fell into pieces. The merchant could not keep his wife and his sons together. They drifted apart. The merchant, resting on a plank, was tossed onto an island. He wept over the fate of his family and then addressed his prayers to God, leaving them to his care. He roamed about on the island. He found the land extremely fertile, meaning that there could be a lot of things growing there, and maybe he was able to find food. It abounded in a variety of fruits and flowers. There were rivers and springs with sweet waters, but he did not see a single soul. At night, he took abode in a cave. That means he took shelter in a cave. And you can see that picture right there. He's going into the cave. Right there. He dreamt of a tunnel that was filled with gold and diamonds. He woke up that morning to discover that the cave itself led to a tunnel, and that tunnel was full of wealth. The next day, a large ship anchored there. The passengers were the inhabitants of another island. There were people living there, but they were traveling. A famine had visited that island. That is why they had deserted it. But they did not know where to go. The merchant invited them to settle down there. He selected some of them and asked them to sail to Israel for buying grain. He gave them enough gold. He also started cultivation on the island. Soon, more people came to settle down there. He was kind to all and gave each one suitable work. Needless to say, he was the acknowledged king of the island. As his merchant turns into a king. He made a regular harbor where he had landed. Ships came there for rest and for gathering provisions. That means getting supplies for their next journey. They need to eat and drink and stuff on the ship, right? So they need supplies. Years passed. One day, a young man met the king and offered his services to him. The king found the young man quite brilliant. He made him a member of his personal staff. Soon thereafter, another young man too joined his staff. The king liked both of them very much, but as a principle, like as a rule, he never asked anybody of his past, for his own past was so sad. One day, a merchant from another land met the king and offered to sell him some special kinds of herbs. The king was interested in them. He asked the merchant to spend the night with him so that he could learn from him more about the herbs. "My lord, there is reason for my returning to my ship to spend the night here." So there they are, king and the two young men that he likes very much on his personal staff, and the merchant who is selling the herbs. "So, my lord, there is reason for my returning to my ship to spend the night there," said the merchant. "May I know what the reason is?" asked the king. "There is a holy woman in the ship. I look upon her as my sister. It is since her coming to live in my ship that I began to prosper. She lives with me on the condition that nobody should insult her in any way," said the merchant. "Don't you worry, I shall send 2 of my most trusted officers to stand guard over her," said the king. He sent those 2 young members of his personal staff to the ship. The 2 young men strolled on the deck. One of them said to the other, "I am feeling sleepy. If you tell me a story, that will keep me awake." "I know hardly any story apart from the story of my life," said the other. He then narrated how, when he was very young, are you all listening to this? He boarded a ship with his parents and another brother, and how a shipwreck separated them, and how he was luckily rescued by a boat. "Do you remember your father's name?" asked the other young man, who was listening to the story with bated breath. "Of course I do," said the first young man, and he uttered the name. The second young man gave out a cry of joy and jumped into the other's arms and explained, "Here I am, your lost brother." The 2 brothers shed tears. There they are, and they're watching over that woman there. The 2 brothers shed tears of joy as they recounted the faint memory of their childhood. The night passed for them happily. In the morning they saw the merchant returning to the ship. "We now leave," they said, addressing the woman whom they guarded, but whom they did not see. She was in the ship's main cabin. 2 hours later, the merchant was back in the king's court, followed by the woman in the veil, the merchant who was selling the herbs. "My lord," he said, "this woman who I had rescued from the sea and whom I revere like an angel has something to demand of those 2 young men who stood guard over her at night." The 2 brothers were summoned. "I demand of them that they repeat their last night's conversation," said the woman. The 2 brothers narrated how they had come to recognize each other last night and spoke out their father's name. The king jumped off his throne and hugged them. "My sons!" he exclaimed. "What? Plot twist! The king is actually these guys' dad. And he was the merchant." But it gets better. "My sons!" exclaimed another voice. It was the woman's. She had shed her veil. The king's amazement was so great that he could not speak for a long time. She is his wife, that he also lost in the shipwreck. And those are their kids. The island went festive for days together to celebrate the reunion of the blessed family. Oh, it's such a feel-good story. I love it. This is so cool. I love these stories. There's so many stories like this from Chandamama, and they're from all over the world. That's my favorite part. I didn't grow up in the Middle East and I don't have family in the Middle East, but I still got to read these kind of stories from the Middle East. So if you like stories like this, join us again next time on Indian Story Read Along. We will see you again soon.